Tonight, the Education and Advocacy Department of Motions is honored to have Mr. Steve Lieberman, the Director of Advocacy and Policy with United Spinal Association, to discuss disability rights and the challenges faced with many people with disabilities. Please welcome Steve Lieberman.
Hey, well, thank you for having me. As a native New Jerseyan, I grew up in Essex County. Definitely happy to be presenting to a New Jersey SIL. As a person with disability myself, I'm autistic, who then went on to work on Capitol Hill for 10 years, and I've now been working for United Spinal Association for 4 years. It's important to me that I do my part to educate our community about what it takes to advocate effectively with our elected officials and their staff. I think it's really important for us to, collectively as a community, understand not only that how essential it is that we be the ones to raise our voices and make our community's priorities heard, but also to make sure that people understand how you can do so effectively. What are the methods that work when it comes to influencing our elected officials and getting our agenda seen in a favorable light, and more likely than not to actually have a chance of happening. So I'll start with a little bit about what I do on a daily basis. So I'm Director of Advocacy and Policy for United Spinal Association, and United Spinal Association is a national nonprofit. We've been around for over 75 years, founded in New York City, advocating for people with spinal cord injuries, neurological disorders, and all wheelchair users. So if folks have a mobility disability, the policies that we advocate for are going to be those that help folks in a pretty broad way. So I've been with United Spinal for 4 years, and what I saw when it came to how our community was conducting advocacy, led me to create some new programs for United Spinal, and the most important of which being our grassroots advocacy network. So I have a very firm belief that as many people as possible from our community need to raise our voices in order for the things that we're advocating for to be heard, to be understood, to be digested by the people who make decisions on policies that affect all of us. So I'm going to share quickly. So this is a map I'm putting up and out for a visual description. This is a map of the United States by congressional district. There are 3 shades of orange on this map, in addition to just a little bit of gray. The gray, so there's 435 congressional districts around the country. And for New Jersey, there are 12. For the country, United Spinal has advocates, at least one advocate in 428 out of the 435 congressional districts currently. The only 7 in which we don't have any advocates at all at the moment, there are 6 in California and 1 in Southern Texas. New Jersey is, comparatively speaking, doing very well in terms of our representation for the number of advocates per district. Most of the congressional districts in New Jersey have 5 or more advocates. The 3 shades of orange that you see on the screen, the lightest shade being 1 advocate, the next shade being between 2 and 4, and the most robust shade of orange being 5 or more advocates in that district. So, you know, what I've been consciously building up over the last several years is our advocacy capacity, and thinking about, well, as drawing on my own experiences as a congressional staffer, you know, when I, as a staffer, would review things that, you know, came into our email inbox or our constituent correspondence software, that, you know, when you send a message to your members of Congress, it goes into a constituent correspondence program. One that I used on Capitol Hill was something called IQ. And, you know, you would go in there and see, you know, 50 people have written in about, you know, this topic, or 100 have written in about this topic, or, you know, 30 have written in about this topic, or 2 have written in about this topic. So you'd be able to sort and do sort of campaign searches and find, you know, things that had similar language, and then pull them together so you could, it would be easier to answer them. So what I found consistently over my time on Capitol Hill is that the disability community as a whole was not sending in enough emails to our members of Congress. Because certainly if that was my experience in one Senate office, you know, I was pretty confident that was what was going on across the country on a whole host of different issues. And when I get into my presentation, I can talk about some of those examples a little bit more. But this is why I've spent so much of my time building up that capacity and getting more people to get involved in our advocacy network, where we send action alert emails out to our advocates, as well as have a variety of advocacy programming. Because if we don't have that network built up where we have enough people that are sending in these messages, we're just not going to register. Because if only one person sends in a message about, you know, for example, if it's talking about raising the asset limits for SSI, or doing something to make air travel safer for wheelchair users, or expanding the housing stock that's accessible for people with disabilities, or making emergency management, you know, more representative for people with disabilities, you know, all these things. And there's many, many more examples I could cite. But if there are not people that are communicating our needs to our elected officials in the numbers sufficient to register for the staff, then they're just not going to pay attention. So that's why it's incumbent upon all of us to get involved and participate in the advocacy activities. Certainly that, you know, we're doing in United Spinal, but broadly speaking, the disability community needs to be participating a whole lot more. We're 25% of the population, right? And if we're 25% of the population, we should be registering in terms of the numbers of emails that are being sent and seen by staffers. And I see Susan has her hand up.
And I'm sorry, you might have just answered. What percentage of you think would, like, of letters or issues before it registers? Did you give that number? Are you going to give that number?
Say again, I'm not sure I
So
understood the
like you
question.
were saying how when, you know, as a staffer, you would get letters and if it wasn't a
Yes.
substantial amount, can you put a
Right.
percentage or a number on that?
So, I would say for a Senate office from New Jersey, which is where I worked, I would, generally speaking, if there were 50 emails coming in from people from around the state on a particular issue, that's when I would generally sit up and take notice. But if there was only one email that was coming in on a particular issue, more likely than not, I would just close it out as a general letter, because I had many, many other things, many topics that were coming in, on a daily basis, weekly basis, biweekly basis, that I would have to pay attention to and answer. So, unless we're communicating in those numbers and getting as many people as possible to be sending those in, then, the staff are not going to be, compelled to do the research and respond in a way that indicates that they've actually paid attention to what it is that we're talking about. All right, so I'm gonna pull up my presentation here in 1 second. And as I do that, one thing I'm going to do before I do that is I'm just going to put in the chat here a link to the sign up form for United Spinal's Grassroots Advocacy Network. And it's a pretty quick sign up form. Just ask for your name, your address, email, phone number. It's really all you need to enter. And by filling out that sign up form, you get plugged into all the emails that we send out, reminders for our programming, and the action alert emails that we send out on different topics. So let me pull this up.
So much for sending that in, Steve.
Yeah, no, I put it in the chat. So let me pull up my PowerPoint. So this PowerPoint has two parts. The first one talks about the programming in United Spinal's advocacy program. The second part talks about different methods of advocacy and, what are the most effective ways that people can advocate with regards to Capitol Hill and our legislators, as well as pulling back the curtain a little bit on how congressional offices make decisions, which I think is really important for our community to understand and appreciate. So I've talked about the Grassroots Advocacy Network. Right now, United Spinal's Grassroots Advocacy Network has 1,942 registered advocates in 428 congressional districts across all 50 states, as well as Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. It's quite a large number of folks that we have in our network that are participating. And there are many different ways that people can get involved with the things that we're doing. So on a monthly basis, we have what's called Advocacy Live. These are monthly virtual discussions featuring advocates from across the United States. And on average, our audience for these discussions are between, 35 to 55, I guess, participants. And, we discuss a variety of topics, facing our community, and different, issues faced at different levels. So whether at the federal level, the state level, the local level, by and large, what we find is that there are some commonalities across state lines, across community lines. So if someone from one state has an issue with, let's say, accessible parking, someone from another state, has dealt with something very similar, and they're able to share their experience. And so, we encourage folks to talk to each other and strategize together, and come together to face our problems and find solutions. We have live streams once a month. These are one-on-one discussions between my colleague Annie Streit and an advocate from our network. They're live streamed on our Facebook channels, and people from across the country can participate via the comments. Actually, our next live stream is tomorrow at 12 o'clock Eastern time. And we're going to be hosting a gentleman by the name of Rob Corbett, who works for a company called Drone Deploy, and they have a very interesting technology using drones that are able to map cities and neighborhoods and identify, using their software, where are the accessible parking spaces, are the curb cuts the right size, are there obstructions in the sidewalk that need to be remedied. I mean, there's a lot of very interesting applications for that software when it comes to making our communities more accessible and identifying things that need to be changed or remedied in order to make that happen. So if people are tuning in tomorrow, October 25th at noon on United Spinal's Facebook page, that's where it's going to be. We also have advocacy working groups. These are a very popular way for people to get involved and participate. Many of our working groups put together community-driven resources for our community. So, for example, our outdoor access working group has put out resources over the last several months on beach access and mobility and accessible camping. Our emergency preparedness working group has put out resources on hurricane preparedness and wildfire preparedness. Our care support working group has put out a resource, comprehensive resource guide on finding and hiring a PCA. And we have other resources that are planned in the next several months. One on what you want your caregiver to know before they walk through the door, as well as on winter sports as well. And our working groups meet roughly once a month for an hour, and that we have a sign up form on our website to sign up for any or all of our working groups, and they're a great way for people to get involved and participate. We also have our role on Capitol Hill that we, I see a hand up. Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I like to ask a lot of questions. So the working groups, how do you decide on those topics?
So, we pride ourselves on these things happening organically. So, we started thinking about, let me see if I can, yeah, there we go. So we started thinking about the working groups after, we would hear through our advocacy live calls, different interests in different topics, and in just one-on-one conversations with folks from across the country. Outdoor access was the first one that we heard consistently from many different folks. This is I'm interested in kayaking. I'm interested in trails. I'm interested in, shooting sports. I'm interested in, beach access. And so we heard over a long period of time that people were really interested in that. And so I said, okay, let's create a space where we can, bring a bunch of like-minded folks together and talk about issues like that. Emergency preparedness came out of, United Spinal has our Ready to Roll emergency preparedness program. And so we wanted a space for folks who either were already participating in that or not, to help, sort of be like the brain trust for that. Parking came about because we had an advocacy live where we just started talking about parking, and our calls are supposed to last for an hour, and this one went for 90 minutes. And so we said, okay, there's clearly energy here. Let's create an accessible parking working group. Care support came about again because a lot of folks talked about how this was a really important issue for them, and then accessible transportation as well. We had an effort that we were doing centered on California around the issue of mobile fueling, that the gas station is one of the most inaccessible places in American life, and that there was a new model that people were trying to get passed in California to allow for just a tanker truck to roll into let's say a parking lot at a ShopRite, and put cones up, and then it's basically like a pop-up gas station, where it's just a pop-up full-service gas station. You just drive up to the tanker, it fills you up, and you drive off. And there's been a lot of folks that were really interested in that, and so there was we had a company we were working with out there. They went through some financial challenges, and so they pulled out, but we still had the people there that were really interested in that topic. And so we said, okay, let's create a working group and make it broader in terms of its scope, to make sure we were hitting a bunch of different issues related to accessible transportation. So that's where that one came about. So we pride ourselves on having it be organic and driven by our community members. So this is all come about because of what our advocates have been expressing in terms of their interests.
And so will you just add new topics, or do you delete old as, do you just keep adding as if there's becomes a different interest?
Well, I think right now we've sort of run into our bandwidth is kind of stretched in terms of being able to add more. We've had some other folks approach us with additional topics, and we've had to sort of push off and say, maybe next year when we, potentially there's, we wrap up some other things and have some time that we can devote to these other topics. But yeah, I mean, potentially, there are other working groups that might emerge for sure. Okay. So let me continue. Roll on Capitol Hill. We have our, this is our fly-in event that we have in June in Washington, D.C., where we bring advocates from across the country for in-person meetings with their members of Congress on important policy issues for the wheelchair user community, and to, forge connections with each other. And then Virtual Advocacy Day, which, coming out of the pandemic, we wanted to make sure that we continued to have the virtual option for our advocates to meet with their members of Congress and their staff. Not only does it, help folks avoid the logistical challenges when it comes to, wheelchair users traveling to Washington, D.C. from around the country, but it also potentially allows for us to have more advocates participating than we normally would if it were an in-person event. The constriction that we find when we do things in person in Washington, D.C. is that there just aren't enough accessible hotel rooms. And so it kind of forces us to restrict the number of folks that can come in person to our role on Capitol Hill. So this allows for us to really double our impact and allow for more people to participate. And then we support folks that want to do state and local advocacy work as well. It includes our chapters and individual advocates. And we have our state and local advocacy menu, which is also located on our website, that provides ideas for advocacy initiatives that folks can do at the state or local level. This is something that we released back in June after many conversations with folks from our network. And it just has a variety of ideas, options for advocacy initiatives that can be pursued by folks in their states or communities on a variety of different topics. And it's by no means something that we think is etched out of marble. It's something that we view as very much a living document that we can edit and update and make changes to. And again, we view everything through the prism of we do things based on what we hear from the community, and we certainly want to hear more things from the community about things we should be pursuing. So I'm now going to get to the second part of my presentation. So in thinking about what makes an advocate, I know there's a certain perception of what advocacy is and who can be an advocate by the disability community. I just want to sort of break down that perception a little bit because I think it's been sort of a little bit warped over the years within our community. There are many different forms and styles of advocacy. At its most basic level, all advocacy is about is asking for something. The fundamental goal of advocacy is communicating a need to someone in a position to help who may not otherwise be aware of that need. And you do not have to be loud or well-known or use civil disobedience tactics to be an effective advocate. There are different tools in the advocacy toolbox. The most effective advocates I've found are consistent but persistent. And the most important thing for an advocate to do is to keep showing up. There are different methods of advocacy. So there's direct action, which is useful for drawing attention and demonstrating ongoing or potential harm. It's less effective at securing positive legislative change. And, I have found over many yees that there's a certain contingent within the disability community that thinks direct action is the only method of advocacy. That is how everything gets done. It's like in so many instances, it's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. It is not what our community should be using for everything. There are certain times where it is certainly useful, but it's not the be all end all. And, I want to make sure that I'm communicating that to our community. So legal advocacy, the use of the courts and the legal system to secure rights, which can secure change large and small, but can also take a long time. There's court hearings and appeals and so forth, and things can wind their way through the courts. And by no means is it guaranteed that it's going to be successful. And then there's legislative advocacy, which is often necessary, particularly on issues of funding. And it may take years to build relationships and momentum, but can result in sweeping, lasting change. And the process can be sped up with the right tactics. It's important to understand that different advocacy tools work best in different situations. So, what I outline as what I pursue is what I call the comprehensive legislative advocacy strategy. So this involves emails and phone calls from as many constituents as possible. And I emphasize constituents. You know, an office from New Jersey does not want to hear from folks in, you know, Denver or Mississippi or California. You know, they want to hear from folks in New Jersey. So it's important that, again, this is why I continue to emphasize, you know, getting as many advocates involved from all over the country so they can communicate with their elected officials, right? Because we need to make sure that all of our elected officials hear us. You know, so emails and phone calls from as many constituents as possible, scheduled small group meetings with lawmakers and staff, like what we have on Roll on Capitol Hill, a virtual advocacy day, follow-up emails with the staff, more emails and phone calls, because they amplify the effect of the meetings. This strategy relies on getting as many people in the community as possible comfortable with sending emails to elected officials. And, you know, with United Spinal, we make it really easy with our action alert emails. When they go out and they, you know, arrive in someone's inbox, all the person has to do is click on the button that we have. It's an orange button. It'll be an orange button that you can click on in the email. Takes you to a page where it has the text of what's going to go to your elected officials. You check to make sure that your name, your email address, and your street address are all inputted correctly, and then you click send message. It can take less than a minute. So we make it really easy for people to communicate with their elected officials.
I'm sorry, can I ask one more question?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
if you're getting people from, are you getting people from all over the country? Because, or this is specific to New Jersey, so you know who the elected, you know, like they don't have to choose their elected official. You know what I mean?
So for each individual, when you input your street address into the system, it pops up who your elected officials are. So if it's a federal thing, it'll put in your member of Congress and your 2 senators. If it's and we do things at the state level as well. So if it's a state issue, like we've put out an action alert on a bill in New Jersey related to emergency management and including people with disabilities more in emergency management in New Jersey. It would pop up, you know, your assembly member and your state senator, or 2 assembly members and your state senator. So, you know, we use a system called Voter Voice that, you know, I go in and I choose, okay, this is federal, this is state, you know, et cetera. So it's all automated and folks don't have to worry that it's whether or not it's going to the right person, because it is. Okay. So the importance of showing up. Congressional offices are fast-paced environments, and congressional staff will only pay attention to groups who engage their office directly. And I know, because I was one of them. They place a lot of importance on hearing from constituents. If congressional offices only hear from United Spinal or, you know, other disability groups once a year, they'll see us as a box to check and not think about us the rest of the year. That's why it's important, you know, not only that we, you know, have our Roll on Capitol Hill or, you know, let's say the Nickel Conference, that, you know, we, you know, communicate on these issues, you know, frequently throughout the year as these things come up. Because if we don't do that, and I know, because again, this was my experience as a congressional staffer. You know, if there was a group that only came in, you know, once a year, and I didn't hear from them again at all during the year, I would, you know, forget about what the issue was. You know, I wouldn't pay attention to it. It's important that we, you know, communicate that, you know, frequently so that, you know, it remains top of mind. You know, we need to stay engaged throughout the year to demonstrate our commitment. So this is a picture just to illustrate So that's me as a Senate staffer. This was from several years ago, and I was meeting with folks from United Spinal Association then, and now I'm on the other side of the table representing United Spinal Association. So I always like having that picture in my presentation because I've been on both sides of the table, so I know what goes into a congressional meeting. So how are congressional meetings? What set up? What goes into them? So, in terms of educating folks, these meetings are set up weeks or months ahead of time, and the staffers will greet the advocates, and then the advocates will make their asks. What are you here for? So, let's say, we want to make air travel safer for wheelchair users. We want to make paratransit better. We want to have Medicare cover wheelchairs and wheelchair components that can be used outside of the home rather than just stuff that can only be used inside of the home, which is what Medicare does now. And then the staffers will respond based on their boss's record and what they can commit to in that moment. So, oftentimes you'll have a junior staffer who can't immediately say, oh, yes, we'll absolutely, support the things that, you're asking us to do. They have to go back and go through a whole process of, figuring out, okay, can we actually support this? So the advocates will take the responses that they get back to their leadership, and then the staffers will review the ask and may or may not take action based on several factors. So now I'm going to pull back the curtain and let you know how congressional offices make decisions. So there is a term that is used on Capitol Hill called running the traps. So basically, getting all the data and figuring out if there are any potential tripwires or minefields out there inherent in the issue. So, analyzing, what is the impact on the state or the district, depending on the office that they're in, and who supports or opposes the issue. And then there's an internal approval process that they have to go through. And usually it comes about by, a staffer writing an email laying out the issue. And then there are different factors that are considered. So, what is the member's history on the issue? Have there been in-person or virtual meetings asking for support? Has the office received emails and phone calls on the issue from back home? How many? What is the ratio of support versus opposed from constituents? And what does the data show about how constituents are affected? So I'll give you an example of why it's so emails and phone calls I emphasize over and over and over again. Why do I do that? So here's an example. In 2019, I would be leaving the Senate in a few months' time for United Spinal, but at the time I was trying to get my boss to co-sponsor a bill that a lot of folks in the disability community were pushing at the time, called the Disability Integration Act. I wrote a memo for my boss and sent it, up the chain. And my legislative director, asked me, well, how many people have written in support and how many people have written in against this bill? And so at the time, for the whole state of New Jersey, 13 people had written in support of the bill and 66 against. And so, the response I got back was, well, how can we justify, if someone asks, why are you supporting the bill? If, let's say, the Star Ledger or the Bergen Record were to ask, why are you supporting this bill? What we're going to say, well, 13 people supported and 66 against, how does that, make us look? We're not listening to people from the state. So I did something a little bit unorthodox. I called the Alliance, SIL, And because I had met with folks from there previously, and I said to them, okay, if you want us to support the bill, you're going to have to get your folks to send us emails and make phone calls on this bill. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to support it. So in a span of a couple weeks, we got 50 some emails and phone calls from New Jersey. And then my boss supported the bill. And then immediately after that, the bill sort of collapsed because a group of disability advocates from Denver and Rochester decided that they were going to go to Frank Pallone's house and make a whole lot of ruckus, apparently before dawn, and try and recreate the Capitol crawl, which torpedoed the bill. And again, this is why I say it's important for folks to understand, direct action is not always the best strategy, especially when it comes to getting people to support bills or co-sponsor bills, et cetera, et cetera. So what makes an effective advocate? I find the best advocates are pesky without being rude. In-person or virtual meetings with staffers are essential. Understand it's both up to you to convince the staffer and up to the staffer to convince their bosses. Work with them. Any staffer on Capitol Hill has two main goals. It's to make their boss look good. It's also to make themselves look good. They want to advance their careers. So if somebody, an advocate, comes to them, they take a meeting with them and present an issue where, they're just waiting for a champion to emerge on a particular issue. And by and large, in the disability community, where we seem to over rely on just a few Congress members and senators to introduce practically everything. The opportunities are there for a lot of our members of Congress to distinguish themselves when it comes to disability issues. So if there's something out there, an issue related to our community that is just waiting for somebody to, take the lead, every office, every staffer is looking for those opportunities where they can have their boss take the lead on something, because not only does it make their boss look good, it makes themselves look good that they found this opportunity. So it's so important to work with the staffers on these issues, because it's only in their benefit to do that. Make sure to follow up with the staffer after the meeting, and then demonstrate strength by getting constituents to email and make phone calls. Know your deadlines if you have them. So if there's, let's say there's a letter for an appropriations issue, know what your deadlines are, and know when to pull back. Don't burn your bridges. So the example that I give here, there was a constituent who was very, very passionate about a bill relating to ectodermal dysplasia. And she would call the office, continuously call the office to try and get support for the bill. And then eventually decided to call up and yell at and berate the young staffer barely out of college, using, some pretty foul language. And, we had to, call this person back and say, look, we're sorry, we can't support the bill. You treated our young colleague, so horribly, that, we can't reward that behavior. So, always, make sure to remain courteous in dealing with staffers and with legislators. So, applying these lessons for the disability community, we need a critical mass of consistent, engaged advocates in every congressional district around the country. We need constituent ambassadors who can provide the disability perspective for elected officials if they have questions. By applying consistent pressure and by cultivating relationships with congressional offices, we gain more allies on Capitol Hill and achieve better outcomes. But let me just pull it back for a second. In terms of United Spinal, what are our expectations? We want every advocate to participate at their own pace. We recognize that everybody has their own life, their own amount of bandwidth, and we don't put pressure on our advocates that they have to go out and do everything and be the super advocate. We want to create opportunities for people to participate and get involved, and we provide many opportunities to do that. And we're not going to sit up on our perch and say, okay, everybody has to do everything. No, we're not about that at all. We want everybody to participate at their own pace and in their own way. And anyone can participate so long as they care about the issues facing people with SCID and wheelchair users, and broadly speaking, in the disability community. Whether you're a self-advocate, you're a family member, you're a colleague, you're a friend, as long as you care about the issues, we want your voice, we want your perspective, we want you to participate, because when it comes to congressional staff responding to the emails that they get on these issues, they cannot look through the computer screen and see whether or not that person is a wheelchair user. So we want as many people as possible to be sending in these messages because it is so important. And then we have here QR code. So it takes you to the same place I put in the chat earlier. So if folks wanted to scan the QR code there, it takes you right to the sign up form for our grassroots advocacy network.